Hey guys, Tony here with Drinking the Bourbs. So last video we talked about Bourbon 101. This video we're going to talk about some terminology. Hopefully this will help you discern some of the information that is popped on these bottles when you're sitting in a liquor store trying to look at them. Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, bottled in bond, 100 proof, 50% alcohol by volume. Sour mash. Sour mash we won't get into today. That is more of a discussion for a distillation process video. But I do want to get into some of the other stuff like the Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. When you're standing there, hopefully this information today, this terminology will help you to determine some of the stuff that's on those bottles. And also help you in a discussion. If you're trying to talk to the liquor store and they throw some stuff out, you'll know what it is that they're talking about. So, without further ado, let's get into the list of terms here. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list. So, if at the end of this video there's anything that you've heard or you would like to know a little bit more about, drop a comment. Let me know. I will absolutely do a follow-up video and try to address any questions that anybody has. Let's get started here. We're going to go sort of in alphabetical order. It goes a little off the rails at the end because I kind of added some more terms in about bottling stuff. But just to start off, ABV. ABV, very plainly, is just the percentage of alcohol that's contained inside the juice in that bottle. So 40% alcohol by volume, 45, 50, so on and so forth. It's just the percentage of alcohol that is contained in the distillate inside that bottle. This is where we're going to go a little wonky on the alphabetical though, because I'm going to go ahead and throw proof on top of that as well. Proof is just the percentage of alcohol by volume doubled. So a 40 proof liquor or a 40% liquor is an 80 proof liquor. You cannot have a 40 proof bourbon, by the way. Does not exist because it would be too low. You have to be at least 80 proof to be a bourbon. So, but yeah, so if something is 42.5% alcohol by volume, that's going to be an 85 proof distillate. And so that's all ABV and proof really is the amount of alcohol that is inside that bottle. Age statements. So if you watched my previous video, you'll know anything under 4 years old has to have an age statement. It's on a legal obligation. It has to have an age statement on the bottle. So you will see some places, and they might not put it right on the front. It might be on the back, but it'll be on there somewhere. If the distillate is under 4 years old, it will have an age statement. Aged at least 6 months, aged at least 2 years, aged at least 3 years, aged at least 4 years. All of that stuff will be on there. Now, over 4 years old, you don't have to put an age statement. There's no legal obligation to do so. At that point, we know if there's no age statement, the only way for that liquor to be legal, the only way for that bourbon to be legal is it's at least 4 years old. However, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey or just pure straight bourbon whiskey is aged at least 2 years. So if I have a 3-year-old distillate, I could just put straight bourbon whiskey on the bottle, and that is an age statement. That is a 2-year age statement on the bottle. So I've met the obligation of putting an age statement. Now, bottled in bond, that's a 4-year program thing. It's at least 4 years to be bottled in bond. But that's a whole nother video as well. There's a lot of stuff that goes into bottled in bond in the Bottled in Bond Act. There's a lot of history that goes along with that, so we're not going to get into that too much. But just know that, yes, there's this conglomeration of information that you get when you're on the bourbon trail, and a lot of people think that bourbon has to be at least 4 years old. That's just the bottled in bond that has to be at least 4 years old. If you're over 4 years old and you put an age statement on your bottle, and even at 4 years old, anytime you have an age statement on your bottle, that age statement is of the youngest bourbon that you've put in that bottle. So if I put a 10-year age statement on a bottle, that means that the youngest barrel I put into that mix was 10 years old. There could be a 20-year-old barrel in there too. I can't I can't take a 10-year-old barrel and a 20-year-old barrel and say this is a 15-year. Doesn't work that way. It's a 10-year. It's the youngest bourbon that you put inside the bottle. That is what the age statement on the bottle has to be. Angel share. You're going to hear that if you go on the bourbon trail. You don't really hear it too many other places, but they will heavily talk about the angel share when you're down there. As soon as you walk into a rick house and you smell that bourbony aroma in the air, they're going to let you know that's the angel share. Wood is porous. So as a bottle, or as a, not a bottle, a barrel sits there and ages, the liquid goes into the wood, some of it evaporates out. Almost every single barrel will lose at least 2% of its total volume to the angel share. But that's all the angel share is. It's just evaporate because of the porous nature of wood. Barrel or cask, both really refer to the same thing. It's the new charred oak vessel that you're going to age your distillate in. Most of the time it's going to be a barrel in the very standard barrel shape and format. And so the word barrel and cask are really uniformly used. A blend or a blended bourbon. This is where you've taken bourbons from several different distilleries, usually, and you've blended them together to try to create a unique flavor profile. Barrel bourbon, literally Barrell, does a special one of these every year where they take several distillates from different places, blend them together to create a unique flavor profile and bottle it and sell it. And so as long as each one of the distillates that's used still adheres to the standard bourbon rules, you can still call that bourbon. But they all have to adhere to those rules of the standard bourbon format. You can't put a whiskey in there and then still call it bourbon. You can't mix 3 bourbons and a straight rye and still call it bourbon. It doesn't work. It all has to be bourbon that's blended in order for it to be a blended bourbon. Dram. Dram is a unit of measurement that you will hear people refer to from time to time. The standard pour for a whiskey in the U.S. is 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces, depending on the distillate. So I would never refer to a 2-ounce pour as a dram. However, a 1-ounce little taster pour of something, I absolutely would say you could count that as a dram. However, the definition of dram, as far as a unit of measurement goes in the U.S., is a liquid measurement equal to 1/8 of a liquid ounce. However, the other definition of dram in the U.S. is a small portion of something to drink. So I think if you go down to a 1-ounce pour, that's a small portion of a standard pour. That's a dram. You can count that as a dram. Brings us to our next weird unit of measurement, a finger. So on a standard rocks glass, if I take my finger and go just above the solid glass part and wrap my finger around it and pour bourbon until it comes to the top of that finger, that's a 1-finger pour. It's a unit of measurement that was used in bars for a good many years. Somebody would go in and say, give me 2 fingers. The bartender would grab the glass, fill to there, and I believe they were even charging them by the fingers. They didn't charge them by the quote-unquote pour. They were charging them by the finger. So that's all a finger is, a finger of whiskey. Palate. Palate's a word you're going to hear people say a lot these days. A lot of people are trying to develop their palate or enhance their palate. All the palate really is an individual's ability to discern the flavors that they're detecting inside the distillate in this glass. So my palate is, I pick up some of the flavors, but really my palate is, this is good. That's kind of how my palate works. This is good. That one's not as good. It's still good, but just not as good. So that's my palate measurement. Other people are like, ooh, leather and orange. Maybe a little bit of anise I'm not that deep into it yet. I hope one day to be able to discern all that. But yeah, right now I'm just, this is good. This is good. I'm gonna drink it. That one's good, 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 good. Those are good. Those down there are good. These over here, good. They're all good. So, uh, whiskey. Let's just knock this out. There's two different spellings of whiskey in the world. There's Whiskey, the correct way, and then some people spell it without the E. So standard in the U.S. and Ireland, there's an E in whiskey. Scotland, Japan, and Canada, however, don't use the E typically. So they're wrong. We're right. That's all there is to that. Sorry, Canadians and Japanese people and Scottish. I don't really like Scotch though. So I mean, send me a bottle of something 23 year and we'll see what happens. Anyway, moving on. So we're going out of the alphabetical order now because we're going to talk about some other stuff. Small batch. You're going to hear that a lot. There's no legal definition of what a small batch is. It's just whatever the distiller says is a small batch sampling that they want to turn into a unique flavor profile. A lot of times when you buy a small batch, it will say small batch select, which usually would indicate to you that their master blender distiller has gone out and hand selected some barrels that he thinks are going to create a very unique flavor profile. And so in those small batches, you should be looking for a diversity in the overall flavor profile. Now, when Jim Beam throws thousands and thousands and thousands of barrels into a giant vat and fills up a whole bunch of bottles of white label, you pretty much expect that bottle to taste exactly the same time after time after time after time. But if they were to say, hey, we're going to make a Jim Beam small batch select, I would expect that every single batch of that gets put out, we're going to have slight differences. I might not be able to taste them. I might just think it tastes good. But people with a better palate might be able to pick it up. Single barrel, distillate from one single barrel. Cannot contain any distillate from any other barrel and still be considered a single barrel. I think it was Eagle Rare that actually moved away from the single barrel designation on their bottles because they went to a system where, so they do still take a single barrel, pour it in, but then when that gets down to the bottom of the tank, they pour the next barrel in. And so there's that small little gap where you could have the distillate from two different barrels. And so they just took the single barrel designation off. Still a 10-year bourbon and still good. So I'm not bothered by it. Sourced whiskey is going to be a big buzzword that's out there for a long time because there's a company in Indiana that's doing it really, really well. So all sourced whiskey means is that I am a distiller that wants to have a bourbon out there with my name on it, but I don't want to make it and I don't want to barrel it. I'm going to let somebody else handle that portion of it. So I'm going to go to someplace like MGP. I'm going to say, hey, this is what I want my mash bill to be. This is a yeast strain that I like. This is the flavor profile I'm looking for. And I'll be back in 4 years to pick that up and I'll bottle it myself. And so that's all sourced whiskey is I'm having somebody else make the distillate. I'm still considered a distiller. And I'm going to handle the bottling usually myself. This is going to bring us to foolproof. So a foolproof bourbon. This is one that's become pretty popular out there. All foolproof means is that what goes into the bottle is at the same proof point that it was when it went into the cask, which is usually going to be 125. 125 is the highest that you can possibly barrel something and still call it a bourbon. And so what they'll do is they'll take the distillate out of the barrel, proof it back down to that 125, bottle it as a full proof. Now then that brings us to cask strength, cask proof, barrel strength. All of those things mean the same. They all four of those different terms, barrel proof, barrel strength, cask proof, cask strength, all mean the same thing. It is going into the bottle at the exact proof point that it came out of the barrel at. There is no water added, there's no dilution, no cutting. It is those barrels going into a bottle at the proof point that they're at. There's no dilution at all. Which brings us to a weird term. Not really weird, but you just won't hear it very often, and that is bottling proof. All bottling proof is the proof point at which a distiller bottles a certain product. So somebody like Basil Hayden bottles at 80 proof. At least one of their distillates, one of their products is bottled at 80 proof. I know I've seen some that are always 86 proof. I've seen some that are always 94 proof, always 95 proof, whatever the case may be. The bottling proof is the proof point that they go to. 90% of the time, though, when you hear somebody talk about bottling proof, it means they're talking about diluting it down to that 80 proof to bottle it. As far as proof and stuff goes, like I said, once again, it all just is down to your taste. Some people start off with something like a Basil Hayden and end up on a, cask strength, larceny, or a cask strength of, trying to think of one of the heavier rye ones, but like a rare breed, from Wild Turkey. So it just depends on where your flavor profile takes you. Some people start in those really high proofs and end up down in the low ones because they like something that they can sip on that's gentle. So, completely up to you, whatever you like. But anyway, I hope these terms help you a little bit. If there's any that I missed that you'd like to know about, drop them in a comment. I will absolutely make a follow-up video to this and try to address any questions that I get. Until next time, I hope you guys are drinking something yummy. Cheers.